time for this.
It's getting serious, Bruce. If this continues, it won't be long before you've nothing.
I don't care.
Your compassion is a weakness your enemies will not share.
That's why it's so important.
Hadouken!
Hello everyone, my name is Sen and welcome to Crouch Block and my discussion piece of The Batman. In this video, I'll be pulling from a number of popular Batman media. I feel as if I have to start this discussion piece with the events that led me up to this point. The Batman released to theaters on March 4th of 2022 with a budget of $100 million. And at the time of release, the film has grossed a revenue of $598.1 million. From the moment I'd first finished watching this film, I knew I wanted to write about it in some capacity. But actually getting there never reached the infancy stages of the writing process, so I held off until I could purchase the film to take another look. The Batman was available to stream on April 18th, 2022, and the last 2 or so months have been filled with a lack of energy and motivation. It's not that I haven't had anything written, but getting anything past the beginning stages of a script has been a little rough, so I finally scraped something together to share with you all. First things first, initial impressions. I'm more than a little curious to hear what you all thought on your first viewing of The Batman. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you find this video entertaining in any capacity, please give it a share. It would really mean a lot and help out just as much. Now, it's been a while since my first viewing. I only happened to watch it once in theaters, but I remember thinking the movie was just good. I was left with the feeling that the film didn't do anything wildly poor or amazing. I felt like it ticked all the boxes, but I didn't leave the theater excited at what I just watched. Somewhat recently, I was listening to Kind of Funny's interview of The Batman, and I felt the person who most closely mirrored what my feelings were on this movie was Greg Miller.
Before moving on to someone else, do you think that watching it again might change your opinion, or you kind of go in where like you're feeling kind of locked on it?
I think it could. Like, again, like it's a weird thing because I know this sounds negative. I'm not negative. I enjoyed it. You should go see this movie. But when people have asked me since then, what did I think of this film? All I can muster is it's good. It's been good.
The whole time I was subconsciously comparing the movie to the Nolan trilogy, but more specifically the first 2 films, and I'll be bringing up key points along the way. What I will say is that it's an extremely good problem struggling to figure out what mainstream source of superhero media I find to be the strongest. The first thing I want to touch on is the overall feel and flow of the movie. This movie centralizes around the Riddler, and the goal of the film is to make a world in which the Batman feels necessary. The antagonist of the story is the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, and at this point in time I'm completely unfamiliar with Paul Dano's work other than the Batman. In contrast with the last live-action portrayal of the Riddler, played by Jim Carrey in Batman Forever, which is extremely cartoonified, campy version of a Batman tale, the 2 roles are not even comparable, other than the fact that both characters are playing the Riddler. I was excited for this film. As a live-action portrayal of the Batman that centralizes around the world's greatest detective side of him, it was a different take and I was excited for something fresh. In all honesty, I was let down by that very same side of the film. Almost every conclusion Batman gets to is immediate, without any explanation as to how he reached that conclusion. If you want to get the audience behind Batman, they have to understand his line of thinking. It makes the audience feel just as involved at solving the riddles as the Batman does. So what's the goal of the Riddler? The goal of the Riddler is to break open and bring to light any and all cracks within Gotham's elected officials and its governing bodies. But the point of the Riddler from the overall aspect of the film is the very same as the Batman in the Nolan trilogy. In the Nolan films, the point of the Batman is that he is no man, and any and all actions the Batman does can be attributed to anyone. Anyone can be the Batman. The Riddler is the equal and opposite in this scenario. Anyone could have become the Riddler because he's a man, a boy that fell through the cracks of the corrupted, broken political system.
Do you know what being an orphan is? It's 30 kids to a room. 12 years old and already a drop in it, numbing the pain. You wake up screaming with rats, chewing your fingers. And every winter, one of the babies die because it's so cold.
Let's talk about the Batman, and boy do I have a lot to say. The Batman has never felt so far away of what I thought the Batman should be. He's strung along through the entirety of what the Riddler has planned for him. He feels as if he controls next to nothing, and that very point has a stake driven through it and solidified at this very moment.
It was all there. You mean you didn't figure it out? Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
Batman's honestly just playing defense, and it feels like he's holding things together with just band-aids. It almost feels as if he's always on the back foot. Is this a less competent Batman? I don't know. Before I continue, this is all based around my ideals of what the Batman is or feels like.
Something just feels wrong when Batman chooses to tackle his opposition by going through the front door.
The only way in my mind I can remotely justify this course of action is if the film wants to show Batman as a sort of unstoppable force, that you can't keep him down or hold him off with any or every roadblock. And with that, I've thought a lot about the combat. I would like to draw attention to a scene from The Dark Knight and a similar scene in The Batman. Both scenes take place in a club. Both scenes have Batman taking things head on. There could not be a greater difference with how the Batman disperses his enemies. The reason I picked both of these scenes is the general approach. It honestly would have been much easier to compare any other scene of the Batman taking down any group of enemies, where Batman takes down a group of thugs using any kind of tact. Batman takes care of any foes in front of him expertly, like he's fighting off children. Out of what I recall, he gets hit less than a handful of times. In The Batman, the choreography is all reactive. Batman gets hit more than enough times. Yeah, he makes it through, but it just kind of feels off. And maybe it's a different take. Maybe it's a different kind of Batman. But Batman should have more than just a direct approach under his belt. There are some parts of these scenes that I really do like. The fact that they went out of their way to set up a reverse horror movie scenario is lovely. Batman is the thing in the shadows that they fear. It reminds me a bit of the movie Invisible Man. It draws attention to the importance of the space that Batman doesn't occupy. But head-on is not Batman's only way of dealing with things. He's more than just that one dimension. Now, onto a bit of the visual elements. This movie is more than cool to me. It feels lost in time. This feeling mostly centralizes around Batman and Bruce himself. So much of the technology Batman uses feels akin to old phones, fax machines, tape recorders, things of that nature. But what it's all used for far surpasses the shackles of the time that it came from. I mean, look at the Batmobile. This isn't a Tumblr. It's much closer to some high school personal project you left in your garage for 4 to 10 years. In this sort of 80s aesthetic, it reminds me of the Batman animated series. But it feels out of place because people have modern cars and the newest iPhone they can get their hands on. And on top of that, the Riddler is a streamer. I wasn't a huge fan of this, but it also gave me a small chuckle to think about the Riddler thanking everyone for their donations and making a newest sub goal. Let's speak a little on the things that oppose the Batman other than the Riddler. I think we should start with the Penguin. The Penguin owns and runs a nightclub, the Iceberg Lounge, and uses it as a cover for his dealings with drug manufacturing for one Carmine Falcone. Penguin, without a doubt, in my mind, is waiting in the wings for an opportunity to rise to power, and that's shown at the capturing of Carmine. Well, and, the death. The Penguin has inherited an empire. There's nothing I would like to make a direct comparison to regarding the performance of the Penguin. I think it was through and through well done. I think Robin Lord Taylor did a fine job in Gotham, but this version of the Batman demanded a bit more of a different performance, and Colin Farrell nailed it. Now, what we do have a direct comparison for is Carmine Falcone. A main focus when Carmine Falcone is used as a plot device is his relationship with the Waynes. It always begs the question of the actual nobility Bruce believed the Wayne family had. If there's actually connections and dealings with the mob, and if the legacy of the Waynes was built on top of bodies and lies. This attempts to add an extra dimension of the depth of Bruce's character, because it's always a matter of what Bruce chooses to do in light of this information, true or not. Relating to Falcone, I want to take a look at 2 conversations had between Bruce and Falcone. The first, of course, being The Batman, and the second from Batman Begins.
Look, your father was in trouble. This reporter had some dirt, some very personal stuff about your mother, her family history. Everybody's got their dirty laundry, that's just how it is, but he didn't want none of it coming out, not right before the election. Your father tried to pay the guy off, but he wasn't going for it, so he came to me. I never seen him like that. He said, Carmine, I want you to put the fear of God in this guy. And when fear isn't enough.
That's the power of fear.
I'm not afraid of you.
Because you think you got nothing to lose. But you haven't thought it through. You haven't thought about your lady friend down in the DA's office. You haven't thought about your old butler. Bang! People from your world have so much to lose.
These are 2 very different conversations, and I'll leave it to you to decide which is more impactful. In The Batman, this comes at a time where Bruce is searching for a truth. Not the truth, a truth. Out of what we know, the whole truth is completed by Alfred. With this first conversation, we're supposed to feel as if the fog is being lifted and another is being added in front of our eyes. The version of the story is to put Carmine Falcone in some sort of twisted, yes, but good standing with Bruce, and maybe even make him feel indebted to Carmine. The only problem I have with the scene is that it gives you a maximum of 1 minute to sit with it. Literally, I think it's like 45 seconds. After that, it illuminates Bruce to the bigger picture when he visits Alfred in the hospital. Have him sit with it for a while. Question if everything he's done up until this point is built on a lie. Do for Bruce in this story what he is supposed to do. Now, I want to move to Batman Begins. I've never come across such an uneven playing field other than this scene. It's a little on the nose with the theming, but at this point in time, Bruce controls next to nothing. This is so much different than a Carmine Falcone that stays in hiding. This version of him commands so much that he makes a point of it to Bruce.
Could have just sent a thank you note.
I didn't come here to thank you. I came here to show you that not everyone at Gotham's afraid of you.
Only those who know me, kid. Look around you. You'll see 2 councilmen, a union official, a couple off-duty cops, and a judge. Now, I wouldn't have a second's hesitation in blowing your head off right here and right now in front of them. Now, that's power you can't buy.
He's out in public threatening to blow Bruce's head off in front of all these governing officials and telling him nothing would come of it. Everything we see up until this point is supposed to be fuel to deploy Batman in the story. A world that needs a Batman. The Batman is supposed to be a symbol of fear, because his symbol with a face would otherwise be killed or corrupted. There's so much a difference between the Falcone that is a myth, the Falcone that stays in hiding and operates from the shadows, a Falcone that uses a face, such as the Penguin, to keep his operations moving, and one that doesn't even care if he's seen or heard or even kills in public, and even in front of law enforcement because they just can't touch him. The last bit of opposition up against Bruce and the Batman comes from Gotham itself, which is the law enforcement. It is stated that at this point in time, Bruce has been working alongside the GCPD for approximately 2 years, but they feel so at odds with each other, and the only bridge gapping them is Gordon. How we see Batman interacting with the GCPD feels much closer to him working with them for the first few weeks. It's strange to see Batman interacting with anyone other than Gordon. I enjoy what this movie's trying to do, and we get a scene like this because of it. It is impossible at this moment to not see Jim's desperation to get Batman out of this bind.
We gotta get you out of here. I'll put a lot of heat on you. Oh, you punched me in the face.
Now what this is all building towards is a Batman that no longer operates in the shadows, or is a myth. This is building to a Batman that can work hand in hand with the GCPD, and this is supposed to be made good on at the end of the movie, but it's also enhanced by Batman's continually being viewed as a force of vengeance, and also at the end looking to turn it around and become a symbol of hope. Now at this time, I would like to cover a little bit more on the Riddler. I've already gone over that this is a bit more of a serious take on the character. This is an Edward Nygma that is damaged because society let him down and is unfairly weighed towards the people he feels doesn't deserve it. In the first moments that they choose to deploy the Riddler in this movie, it feels as if it's supposed to be setting up the origin for Bruce. It's possible that this is supposed to be the first board in the bridge that connects Bruce and Edward. Bruce and Edward were both orphans, and while Edward was falling through the cracks of society, Bruce still had a place to call home. He still had something that resembled a normal life. Every encounter with the Batman is treated as a game. This is expanded upon because games and puzzles were Edward's escape from his cruel reality. Nearing the end of things, Bruce Wayne becomes a target himself.
I grew up from a seed, tough as a weed. But in a mansion, in a slum, I'll never know where I come from. Do you know what I am? Any idea? Yeah. He's an orphan.
$1 billion was pledged by Thomas Wayne for the Gotham Renewal Foundation. After the death of Thomas Wayne, it was sought after by Gotham's underbelly. Now, after the Riddler found out about Thomas Wayne's connection with Carmine Falcone, it was natural for him to breathe the idea that renewal was a lie.
Renewal. The empty promise they sold to me as a child in that orphanage. One look inside and finally I understood. My whole life has been preparing me for this. The moment when I would learn the truth.
Now for the actual capture of Edward Nygma, it comes at a point when things with Batman feel like they're on an upswing. They just took down Carmine Falcone, and only to have him assassinated. Even in his capture, the deck still feels stacked in Edward Nygma's favor. Out of what it seems to me, the Riddler knows that Batman is Bruce Wayne. It feels like it's mirroring one thing in particular to me, and that's why the Riddler will never disclose who Batman is.
I know you, Edward Nygma. Riddles are your addiction, and a riddle that everyone knows the answer to is worthless.
One of the biggest things that stands out with the Riddler in particular is his willingness to get his hands dirty. Alright, let's talk about Selina Kyle. There's been a very large number of actresses that have played Miss Kyle over the years. In large, she's almost always set up as a sort of love interest for an oh-so-complicated Dark Knight. And this version of Catwoman is no exception to that. Honestly, I get a bit of whiplash with this character in this film. For starters, let's talk a little bit about Annika. With a small leap of logic, this is Selina's girlfriend, and if that is the case, the whiplash might just be lethal. From the point that Annika is alive, Selina wants to escape Gotham with her, and outside of her working at the Iceberg Lounge, she would be nothing else but a cab burglar. Her ambition within Gotham is to get the money she feels rightfully belongs to her from her father, Carmine Falcone, who is unaware of the relationship between them. Selina is used as Batman's infiltration for the underground club, 44 Below, which is where the Batman finds out there is a sort of relationship between Selina and Carmine, even though he doesn't understand what it is. Fast forwarding a bit, Selina decides to intercept some dealings that the Penguin is working in and get some of her money. She finds out that Annika, her perceived lover, is dead, and eventually her and Batman share a kiss in the same movie. That was pretty quick. Maybe it's one of those time of weakness things. If it is the case where Annika is Selina's lover, this could have been set up nearing the end of the movie with a sort of bridge that could lead into a future relationship. It didn't. Yay! Time for Alfred. Alfred, for at least a long time, has been a reminder for the Batman of his mission. Constant reassurance that he and his family are good people and desperately trying to do the right thing. At the beginning of this movie, the first moments of Bruce and Alfred, it lays so many cards on the table and feels so painfully on the nose with them.
If I can't have an effect, I don't care what happens to me.
That's all I'm afraid of.
Alfred, stop. You're not my father.
This gets pushed aside when Alfred is reminded of why Bruce does all this, so no little boy will ever have to live that night. Andy Serkis does a wonderful job in being a believable human in all of this. His performance and care and the emotion he delivers is all wonderfully acted. But even though that is the case, there's nothing iconic left on the table about his performance. Michael Caine's version of Alfred might be less believable, but it's more iconic.
One day, I saw a child playing with a ruby the size of a tangerine. The bandit had been throwing them away.
So why steal them?
Well, because he thought it was good sport, because some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
With all this, we can finally bridge a bit more to Bruce. The story of Bruce and his becoming a Batman has been etched into history. Much like Peter Parker's becoming Spider-Man, at this point we all know it so well. I think this movie did a fine enough job cluing us all in at the events that they did in fact happen, without having to go out of their way to show us. Bruce Wayne typically puts on the face of a billionaire playboy as a ruse, to more so lead away suspicion of Bruce being the Caped Crusader. This version of Batman doesn't use that as a cover. This version of Bruce Wayne has not been seen in the public eye for quite some time. It's possible there is speculation of him being the Batman. I'm fine with not seeing Bruce's parents get shot. With that, we haven't had a big screen version of the Batman's origins since March 25th, 2016, with the release of Batman vs. Superman. I haven't watched the film, but I can't help but to feel, even without watching it, that Batman Begins does it a bit better. Now, for someone like me who hasn't watched Batman vs. Superman, we haven't had an on-screen origin of Bruce Wayne to become Batman since 2005. The first outing Bruce has actually had for quite some time was the memorial of Don Mitchell Jr. It even goes as far as Alfred setting up meetings for Bruce without informing him, and these meetings take place at his house because he won't leave. This mostly feels as if it centralizes on the trauma Bruce had from that very night. I feel as if they don't push this home enough, but it feels as if it wants to hone in on Bruce being obsessed with being the Batman. He's out every night, and sometimes even longer than that. He has to keep journals of the events that went on so he can remember them. With this movie End Begins, there's a similar theme of fear, but it goes two very different directions. As I've explained, Bruce wants to transform the air of fear around the symbol of the Batman into one of hope, creating a symbol that people can put their faith in and look towards. Now, in Begins, it's clearly stated, to conquer fear, you must become fear. Criminals do what they do out of fear. These corrupted officials are entangled with that because they're afraid. And Carmine Falcone said it so clear. You fear what you don't understand. To wrap this all up, I want to summarize some things with this movie. I like it a lot, but it's not my favorite. It may not be fair for me to compare this movie with a trilogy, but I do so because it feels as if it pulls so much from everywhere. I enjoy who they casted in this movie. I have no qualms with any of it. The only thing I do have any problems with is the parts that feel a little bit forced, i.e., you're not my dad. The Riddler was the biggest star in all this to me because they tried to make you understand his frame of mind, and my goodness, Colin Farrell as the Penguin was wonderful. Certain things feel separate from my ideals of what the Batman is, and that's okay, but for example, he's so direct almost all the time. What I believe the Batman to be is at least a little bit more tactful and tactical than this. It never feels as though he's had the intellectual high ground in almost any of his encounters with the Riddler, but throughout it feels as if he is strung along. The cinematography is wonderful at points, and especially at the beginning when the Batman is first deployed, he is treated and filmed like a horror movie character, and I was a big fan of the club scene with the semi-one-shot. I like this kind of filming technique because it's much easier to follow along compared to a bunch of smashed together jump cuts. Having primarily Bruce or the Batman feeling lost in time is lovely. It has a feeling of calling back to a majority of his character work being placed in the 80s. The thing I wasn't happy with was at the end of the film with the reveal of our potential next big villain being the Joker. This Batman in particular is not one that feels as if he hinges on the Joker's existing. I hated this scene of them yucking it up. Something I would have loved to have seen was something setting up Harvey Dent being the next district attorney, or maybe something with Mr. Freeze. All in all, I like this movie. If anyone hasn't watched it, I would recommend you do so. Even if you don't like it, I think this film is worth study just to gather your feelings on it. This isn't my favorite source of popular Batman media, but it's so far from the worst. If they made more, I would gladly consume them. Let me know what you thought about this video and the movie as a whole. Also, let me know if there's something that I didn't talk about that you wanted me to. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you later.